A lonely pilot who lives for his brothers unexpectedly reunites with the great love of his life in full flight, together with a young man who could be his son. But when fate places you in a deadly emergency, you discover that saving lives can be easier than healing a broken past. Miguel adjusted his seatbelt in the cockpit, observing the controls with a meticulous eye. Routine was his refuge, the space where he could hide from the thoughts that plagued him. As a commercial pilot with more than 20 years of experience, he knew how to project calm, even though inside him, the storm never ceased. Dawn was painting the horizon with an orange glow when his co-pilot, Raul, broke the silence. "Always getting up early, eh, Miguel? Sometimes I wonder if you like flying more than your own house." Miguel smiled, a light smile that barely touched his eyes. "The plane is more predictable than life on the ground," he replied, keeping his eyes fixed on the instruments. Raul laughed but didn't press the issue. He knew Miguel was reserved, a man of few words who never shared too much about his personal life. Even though he had worked with him for years, he only knew fragments of his story, as if Miguel deliberately built a wall around his past. As the plane prepared for boarding, Miguel allowed his thoughts to wander to a corner he always tried to avoid. Ana. It was inevitable. Every time he looked at the vastness of the sky, his mind returned to that time. The memory was vivid, as if it had happened yesterday. Ana had been his light in a dark period, a woman whose love had saved him from himself. He remembered her infectious laugh, the sparkle in her eyes when they talked about the future they would build together. But it had all ended abruptly, leaving a void he had never managed to fill. Miguel couldn't help but wonder if he had made the right decisions, or if his ambition had condemned him to this loneliness. A knock on the door brought him back to the present. "Gentlemen, we are ready to board," announced a flight attendant. Miguel nodded, his professionalism returning. He rose from his seat and adjusted his jacket before leaving to oversee boarding. He walked down the aisle of the plane, greeting passengers politely but without getting too involved. However, in the back of his mind, something was bothering him, as if fate was about to take an unexpected turn. As he walked back to the cabin, the feeling that something significant was about to happen enveloped him. Miguel settled back into his seat, watching the plane's engines come to life. Unbeknownst to him, this flight would be much more than a routine journey. Translated from Spanish to English, www.onlinedoctranslator.com, about to face a truth that had remained hidden for years, a truth that could change everything. Miguel checked the final details on the control panel as boarding continued. Passengers were filling the seats, and the typical bustle of morning flights echoed through the cabin. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but Miguel couldn't shake that nagging uneasiness, a strange feeling that stuck in his mind like a thorn. When he turned his head toward the main aisle, his gaze froze. There she was, Ana. Her face, though a little more marked by time, was still unmistakable. Her eyes, those same ones that had once been his refuge, calmly scanned the plane as she helped a young man find his seat. Miguel felt as if time had stopped. His breathing became heavy, and a torrent of emotions washed over him: surprise, nostalgia, and even a touch of fear. What was Ana doing here after all this time? And then, like a flash, the second question popped into his mind. Who was that young man accompanying her? The boy, who couldn't have been more than 18, had a confident stance. But what really caught Miguel's attention was his face. There was something about him, an eerie familiarity that he couldn't ignore. His eyes, the set of his jaw, even the way he smiled when Ana showed him where to sit. It all seemed alarmingly familiar. "Miguel," Raul's voice brought him out of his trance. "They're about to close the doors. We need your confirmation." Miguel nodded quickly, trying to compose himself. "Yes, of course. Everything is in order." He turned his attention back to the controls, but his mind was in complete chaos. As the plane glided toward the runway, he couldn't get the image of Ana and the young man out of his mind. Every detail, every gesture of both of them played back in his memory like an endless tape. Once in the air, Miguel stole a quick glance at the passenger compartment through the internal cameras. Ana was sitting near the window with a young man at her side. They seemed immersed in a quiet conversation, oblivious to the turmoil they had caused in the pilot of the plane. Miguel tried to keep his composure. His professionalism forced him to focus on the flight, but every fiber of his being wanted to get up and search for answers. The similarity between the young man and himself was too obvious to be a coincidence. Could it be? Anna had seen it too. She knew it. She had noticed it in his reaction when he got on the plane, but she had avoided making eye contact with him, keeping a deliberate distance. That only intensified Miguel's suspicions. If there was nothing to hide, why act so cautiously? The plane steadied on its trajectory, and Miguel took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. He knew he couldn't approach this matter without thinking. A pilot's mind was meant to be clear, focused on the present. Yet for the first time in years, Miguel felt like the past was coming back to confront him, and he wasn't ready for it. The constant roar of the engines filled the cabin, but Miguel's mind was filled with an eerie silence. He had gone over the flight protocol over and over again, more as an attempt to distract himself than out of real need. However, every time he closed his eyes, the image of Anna and the young man came back strongly. His mind seemed unable to escape from this reality that now overwhelmed him. Raul, sitting next to him, sensed the tension in his companion. "Everything okay, Miguel? You seem quieter than usual, and that's saying a lot." Miguel shook his head as if trying to clear his thoughts. "Yeah, I'm just concentrating," he replied, avoiding eye contact. Raul watched him for a few seconds before returning to his controls without insisting. He knew that Miguel was not someone easy to read, but at that moment he seemed especially distant. The pilot stared at the horizon, where a sea of clouds stretched out under the sunlight. As the plane moved forward, his mind went back 20 years, to a time when the skies seemed less turbulent. He remembered the afternoons with Anna in that small apartment they shared, filled with laughter and plans for a future together. It was the time when Miguel dreamed of achieving success as a pilot, and Anna was his greatest support. Together, they seemed invincible. But those sweet memories always led to the same point, the moment when everything fell apart. Anna had wanted stability, a home, a family, while Miguel was obsessed with his career. Back then, he hadn't known how to prioritize, and their paths abruptly separated. "I can't keep waiting, Miguel," Anna had told him with tears in her eyes. "You're always looking up at the sky, but I need you to look down at us." The sentence rang with an almost cruel clarity now. He had been young and proud, incapable of fully committing himself, and though he never admitted it out loud, she had felt his absence every day since. A slight tremor in the ship brought him back to the present. He checked the instruments automatically, confirming that everything was in order. However, his inner turmoil continued to grow. What if that young man really was his son? What if he had been absent from his life all this time? Every thought became a spiral of unanswered questions. Raul's voice interrupted his reverie. "Miguel, I'm going out for a moment to check with the crew. Will you take care of it?" "Sure, go ahead," he replied, grateful for the brief respite from his co-pilot's presence. Left alone, he leaned forward, covering his face with his hands. His position as a pilot required him to remain calm in any situation, but at that moment he felt that the internal storm was much more difficult to handle than any turbulence. Looking up into the inner chambers, he once again observed Anna and the young man. She looked calm, while he leaned towards her, speaking enthusiastically. Miguel noticed the way the young man gestured, so similar to his younger self. It was like looking into a mirror of the past, and it made his skin crawl. She knew she would have to face this situation eventually. But for now, the only certainty was that her past had come back to shake everything she had built, and there was no way to move forward without facing it. The plane sailed smoothly through the sky, its path marked by the stability Miguel couldn't find within himself. After hours of fighting his thoughts, he decided he needed to stretch his legs. He stepped out of the cockpit, trying to keep a neutral expression as he walked down the narrow aisle of the plane. Halfway through, he saw him. The young man was standing by the toilets, apparently waiting. Miguel slowed his pace, feeling a mix of curiosity and nervousness. He hadn't planned on meeting him, but now that he had him in front of him, the opportunity to interact was irresistible. The boy noticed and smiled politely, as if he were just another passenger greeting a crew member. Miguel, though nervous, responded with a nod before stopping next to him. "Everything all right, young man?" he asked, trying to sound casual. The young man nodded. "Yes, thank you. I'm just waiting for my mom." Miguel felt a knot in his stomach when he heard those words. My mom? The confirmation that he was talking about the same young man who had made him restless the entire flight was undeniable. However, he tried hard to remain calm. It's been a good flight so far, isn't it? Miguel continued, trying to prolong the conversation. The young man smiled widely, reflecting a confidence that Miguel instantly recognized. Yes, it's my first time on a plane, but I'm enjoying it so far. Although I was surprised at how complicated it all seems to be to manage, Miguel couldn't help but smile. It takes practice and patience, like many things, but I'm glad to hear that you're enjoying the experience. The young man nodded, and for a moment he looked at Miguel with curiosity. Have you been a pilot for a long time? More than I can count without feeling old, Miguel replied in a light tone, which elicited a brief laugh from the young man. Before they could continue, a familiar figure appeared at the end of the hallway. It was Ana, who stopped dead when she saw Miguel talking to the boy. Her face reflected a mixture of surprise and what looked like discomfort. Lucas, is everything okay? He asked, approaching quickly. Yes, Mom. I was just talking to the pilot. He's very kind, Lucas replied, not noticing the tension that now filled the air. Miguel turned to Ana, their eyes meeting for the first time up close since he had seen her board. She avoided his gaze at first, but then faced him with a restrained firmness. Thank you for looking after the passengers, Ana said politely, but her tone was loaded with obvious subtext. It's part of the job, Miguel replied with a calm he barely managed to maintain. Ana took Lucas by the arm and, with a forced smile at Miguel, began to guide him back to his seat. Lucas looked back briefly, not understanding why his mother seemed so tense. Miguel watched them walk away, feeling the weight on his chest increase. That brief interaction had confirmed what he already suspected. Lucas was his son. Now he just had to find a way to get answers, although the fear of facing the truth kept him paralyzed. As he slowly made his way back to the cabin, Miguel decided he couldn't ignore what was happening. He had spent years avoiding personal connections, but this time he had no choice. The truth was there, at his fingertips, waiting to be faced. Miguel spent the next few hours immersed in a whirlwind of emotions. From the cockpit, his gaze occasionally darted toward the internal cameras, searching for a glimpse of Ana and Lucas. Every time he saw them together, the weight of unanswered questions became more unbearable. Finally, when the plane reached a stable and calm phase of flight, she made a decision. She couldn't pass up the opportunity to confront Ana, even if the outcome was painful. After all, if Lucas was really her son, she had a right to know the truth. He waited patiently until an opportune moment presented itself. Ana had gotten up to walk down the aisle and seemed to be seeking some privacy. Miguel discreetly left the cabin, taking advantage of the fact that Raul had taken control for a while. Seeing her by the back kitchen, he decided to act. Ana, he said in a low voice, just enough to catch her attention without attracting that of the others. She turned slowly, her eyes reflecting surprise and caution. Miguel. There was a moment of tense silence between them, as if the years that separated them were condensed into that brief moment. We need to talk, he said, trying to keep his tone controlled. Ana sighed and nodded, motioning for him to follow her to a less crowded corner. Once there, she crossed her arms, as if trying to protect herself from what she knew was coming. Why are you here, Ana? Miguel asked directly, without beating around the bush. I'm traveling with my son, Lucas, she replied in a neutral tone, but her posture betrayed her discomfort. Miguel tilted his head slightly, searching her gaze. He is mine? The question hung in the air. Ana closed her eyes briefly before answering, as if she needed to gather her strength. Yes, Miguel, Lucas is your son. The impact of those words hit him hard. Although he had suspected it, hearing the confirmation left him breathless. A mixture of anger, disbelief, and sadness took hold of him. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice rising just a tone. Ana looked at him, her expression a mix of regret and firmness. Because I thought you didn't want to be a father. Back then, all that mattered to you was your career. You were always looking ahead, toward your goals, and never at what was in front of you. Miguel felt guilt beginning to invade him, but his anger was even stronger. That didn't give you the right to decide for me. I had the right to know, Ana. Really? she replied in a defiant tone. Would you have given up your career for him? Because at that moment it seemed like nothing could compete with your obsession with flying. Miguel didn't know what to say. There was truth in her words, and that hurt more than any accusation. But before he could process what he felt, an urgent announcement interrupted their conversation. Captain, please return to the cockpit, a voice said from the speaker. We need your presence. Miguel looked at Ana one last time, his eyes filled with questions that had yet to be answered. This is not over, he said firmly before turning and walking towards the cabin. Ana stood there in silence, watching him walk away. Although she knew she would eventually have to face this conversation, she didn't expect the past to catch up with her in mid-flight. As Miguel walked back to his post, a whirlwind of emotions swept through him. The truth he had so feared to learn was now before him, and though he was only just beginning to understand its impact, he knew his life would never be the same again. The sound of a slight humming alerted Miguel as soon as he re-entered the cabin. Raul looked at him seriously, pointing at the monitors. We have strong turbulence ahead, he said calmly, but with an undertone of concern in his voice. Miguel nodded, quickly adjusting his seat. He put on his headphones and began checking the readings alongside Raul. Stabilizers on. We're going to slow down a bit to minimize the impact. As the aircraft moved forward, the fuselage began to vibrate. The hum of the engines increased, and a slight rocking became apparent. In the passenger compartment, nervous murmurs began to be heard, although the flight attendants tried to remain calm. Miguel took a deep breath and took control, his voice booming steadily through the speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, we have entered a zone of turbulence. Please keep your seatbelts fastened. Our team is working to ensure a safe flight. The aircraft began to shake more intensely, and Miguel felt the tension spreading like an invisible blanket. He knew that the passengers depended on his calm to keep from panicking. However, the echo of his conversation with Ana continued to resonate in his mind. He couldn't afford distractions at that moment, not when so many lives depended on him. From the internal cameras, Miguel watched Ana and Lucas. The young man sitting next to his mother looked around, watching intently as other passengers began to fidget. Suddenly, he stood up, something that immediately caught the attention of the flight attendants. Young lady, please return to your seat, one of them said firmly. I'm fine, Lucas replied, his voice surprisingly confident. I just want to help if I can. Miguel felt a lump in his throat. The determination in Lucas's voice was a clear reflection of something he recognized in himself. In that moment, he saw in him an instinctive bravery, one that couldn't be taught. Raul interrupted his thoughts. Turbulence is intensifying. We need to adjust course. Miguel nodded and returned his attention to the controls. Let's adjust 3 degrees north. This will give us more stability and reduce the impact. The plane stabilized a bit, but the jolts were still significant. Miguel knew that every decision at that moment was critical. He had faced similar situations before, but this time there was something different. In the back of his mind, one constant thought plagued him. Ana and Lucas were on board, and he couldn't afford to fail. As the plane continued to move forward, the shaking gradually began to subside. Miguel and Raul continued to work in coordination, guiding the craft toward a safer trajectory. Finally, after several minutes that seemed like an eternity, the turbulence ceased. We're over the worst, Raul announced, letting out a sigh of relief. Miguel took the speaker again. Thank you for your patience. We have left the turbulence zone, and the flight will continue as normal. In the passenger compartment, murmurs of concern turned to sighs of relief. Miguel looked back at the internal cameras. Lucas was helping an older woman pick up some objects that had fallen during the shaking, while Ana watched him with a mixture of pride and something else, perhaps nostalgia. Miguel felt a pang in his chest. Lucas's bravery was undeniable, and it made him wonder how many other traits they shared. He had spent so much time isolating himself from human connections that now faced with that reality, the idea of being a father overwhelmed him in a way he couldn't ignore. As the plane continued on its course, Miguel realized that this experience was not only a test as a pilot, but also as a man. The turbulence had been temporary, but the storm inside him was not over yet. The plane was cruising through the skies with restored calm, but in Miguel's mind, the turbulence persisted. From his seat in the cockpit, he watched the horizon, but his thoughts were far away. caught up in the recent revelations and emotions he had yet to fully process. He had spent more than 2 decades avoiding personal connections. For him, life in the air had been a way to escape the emotional chaos he felt on the ground. But now, with Anna and Lucas on that same flight, all the decisions of the past seemed to converge in a single moment. Raul at his side watched him out of the corner of his eye. "Everything okay, Miguel?" she asked with a mix of curiosity and concern. "Yeah, I'm just thinking about landing," Miguel replied, trying hard to sound professional. Raul did not insist, but Miguel knew that his words had not entirely convinced his co-pilot. Through the inner chambers, Miguel looked back for Anna and Lucas. Lucas was leaning toward the window, watching the clouds with boyish curiosity. Anna, on the other hand, seemed lost in thought, with an expression that Miguel recognized instantly: guilt. That look hit him hard. He had blamed Anna for hiding Lucas's existence from him, but deep down, he knew he was partly to blame. He had been so ambitious, so focused on his career, that he had left Anna feeling alone, forced to make difficult decisions. For the first time in years, Miguel let his emotions get the better of him. The pride he had always carried like a shield began to crumble, and in its place was something rawer, more human: regret. As he pondered, he realized something that surprised him. He wanted to meet Lucas, not just as a pilot or a distant figure from the past, but as a father. That thought scared and excited him in equal parts. He had spent so much time avoiding commitment that now facing him seemed like an almost insurmountable challenge. In the passenger compartment, Anna was also struggling with her own thoughts. She glanced at Lucas out of the corner of her eye, feeling a mixture of pride and fear. She knew she had made difficult decisions in the past, and although she had tried to justify them, she couldn't help but wonder if she had done the right thing by keeping the truth from Miguel. For years, he had lived in fear that Miguel would reject Lucas if he ever met him, but now, watching him interact with his son, he couldn't deny that something had changed. Miguel seemed different, less cold, more willing to confront what he had always avoided. As the plane continued on its course, Anna found herself longing for something she hadn't expected to feel: hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for reconciliation. In the cockpit, Miguel exhaled deeply. He knew he had a decision to make, and he couldn't put it off any longer. He couldn't let fear paralyze him. For the first time in a long time, he understood that life on the ground, with all its complexities and challenges, was just as important as the skies he loved so much. He turned to Raul. "I'm going out for a moment," he said, getting up from his seat. Raul raised an eyebrow in surprise but nodded. "Don't be late." Miguel left the cabin with determined steps, although inside each step seemed like a leap into the void. He didn't know how Anna and Lucas would react to what he was about to say, but one thing was clear: he couldn't keep running away. Miguel didn't have time to address Anna. He had barely left the cabin when an alert resounded on the plane's monitors. The intercom was activated and Raul's voice called him urgently. "Miguel, come back to the cabin. We have a problem with the hydraulic systems." Miguel's heart skipped a beat. Without wasting a second, he turned on his heels and ran to the cockpit, where Raul was waiting for him with a tense expression. The monitors showed inconsistent readings, and the warning lights were flashing insistently. "The landing gear hydraulic system is not responding," explained Raul. "We will not be able to deploy it on landing if we do not fix it." Miguel sat down, quickly scanning the readings. His mind, trained to handle emergencies, kicked into action. "Let's establish contact with the control tower. Report the situation and request assistance on the ground." Raul nodded as Miguel examined the procedures manual. He knew this would require more than just following instructions. It would require ingenuity, calm, and perhaps a little luck. The internal intercom rang, and one of the flight attendants spoke nervously. "Captain, the passengers are worried. The shaking has increased, and some are panicking." Miguel took the speaker microphone and spoke in a firm, reassuring voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a minor technical problem, but we are working on it. We ask that you remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Your safety is our priority." His calm tone helped quiet the murmurs among the passengers, but he knew he had to act quickly. Every minute counted. As Miguel and Raul worked together to try to restore the system, another jolt ran through the plane. The situation was critical, and Miguel knew that if they couldn't stabilize the landing gear, they would have to make an emergency landing. "Raul, we need to redistribute the fuel to lighten the ship. I'm going to try a manual method to deploy the gear," Miguel said, his voice full of determination. Raul looked at him in disbelief. "Are you sure? It's risky. We have no other choice. If we don't, landing without a gear will be more dangerous." While Raul carried out the orders, Miguel focused on maneuvering the plane as precisely as possible. He knew that he was not only protecting the passengers as pilot, but also Ana and Lucas. That responsibility pushed him beyond his limits, giving him the strength to keep going. From the internal cameras, he watched as Lucas helped an elderly passenger calm down. His calm demeanor and willingness to help impressed him deeply. Miguel felt like he was seeing a reflection of himself in the young man, and that gave him unexpected strength. Finally, after several failed attempts, they managed to partially activate the landing gear. It was not a perfect solution, but it was enough for a controlled landing. Miguel took the speaker once again. "We are approaching our destination. We ask that you remain calm and follow the instructions of our crew." The tension in the cockpit was palpable as the plane descended. Miguel took the controls with absolute concentration, every move calculated to the millimeter. The runway was rapidly approaching, and the margin for error was virtually non-existent. When the wheels touched the ground, a roar ran through the plane. The brakes responded with difficulty, but Miguel maintained control until the plane finally came to a complete stop. A silence filled with disbelief enveloped the passengers, followed by applause and cheers. Miguel exhaled deeply, feeling the adrenaline leave his body. They had achieved the impossible. He took off his headphones and looked at Raul, who patted him on the shoulder. "Good job, Captain." Miguel nodded, but his mind was already elsewhere. He knew that the real challenge was yet to come, facing Ana and Lucas, now that life had given them a second chance. The plane remained stopped on the runway, surrounded by emergency vehicles and ground crews. Inside, passengers breathed a sigh of relief, though many were still visibly shaken. Miguel remained in the cockpit for a moment longer, letting his heart return to a normal rhythm. "That was impressive, Miguel," said Raul, breaking the silence. "Few could have handled this situation the way you did." "Thank you," Miguel replied with a barely perceptible smile. "But this doesn't end here." Raul raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything else, giving him his space. Miguel knew his next step had nothing to do with controls or procedures. It was something more personal, something he had put off for far too long. When he finally stood up, he took a deep breath and exited the cabin. As he made his way down the aisle, several passengers looked at him gratefully, and some even offered him a private round of applause. Miguel nodded politely, but his eyes were focused on one target: Ana and Lucas. He found them standing near their seats, gathering their belongings. Ana looked up and saw him approaching, her eyes reflecting a mix of surprise and suppressed excitement. Lucas, on the other hand, looked at him with a curiosity that Miguel couldn't ignore. "Is everything okay?" Miguel asked, although he knew the question was much deeper than it seemed. Ana nodded, her voice soft but loaded with meaning. "Thank you, Miguel, for everything." Lucas took a step forward, breaking the awkward silence. "Were you the one who landed the plane?" he asked excitedly. Miguel smiled, tilting his head slightly. "Yes, but I didn't do it alone. It was a team effort." The young man looked at him with admiration, and something in his expression melted the barriers that Miguel had built up over the years. It was as if that natural connection between them already existed, even if Lucas didn't know it yet. "Lucas, can you give us a moment?" Ana said softly, placing a hand on her son's shoulder. Lucas nodded, albeit with some reluctance. He headed for the exit door, where the attendants greeted him with friendly smiles. When Ana and Miguel were alone, the tension between them was almost tangible. Miguel was the first to break the silence. "Ana, I've been wondering the whole flight how we got to this point, and I know I've made mistakes, but I don't want to keep running away from this." Ana looked down, as if she were struggling with her own thoughts. "Me neither," he admitted. "For years I thought I was doing the right thing, but seeing you today, it makes me doubt all my decisions." Miguel took a step closer, his voice lowered, but his tone was firm. "I can't change the past, Ana, but now I know that I want to be part of Lucas's life, if you let me." Ana's eyes filled with tears. She had feared this moment for years, but now that it was here, Miguel's words filled her with unexpected hope. "It won't be easy," she warned, her voice shaking. "I don't expect it to be," Miguel replied, "but I want to try." At that moment, Lucas returned, interrupting the conversation. Ana and Miguel exchanged a glance, as if they agreed that the rest of the conversation would have to wait. "Shall we go?" Lucas asked, not realizing the intensity of the moment. "Of course, son," Ana replied with a smile that Miguel had not seen in years. As they walked together toward the exit, Miguel felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, the possibility of a new beginning. And although he knew the road would be difficult, he was willing to face it, this time with both feet on the ground. Days after the flight, Miguel parked his car in front of a small cafe in the city center. He looked at the watch on his wrist. There were still a few minutes left until the appointed time, but his hands were already sweaty. He took a deep breath before getting out of the car, trying to calm his nerves. This was not the kind of situation his pilot training had prepared him for. The soft tinkling of the bell on the door of the cafe announced their arrival. The place was cozy, with a calm atmosphere and warm aromas of freshly brewed coffee. Miguel looked around until he saw them, Ana and Lucas sitting at a table by the window. His heart skipped a beat. Ana looked up first and gave him a small smile. Lucas, noticing Miguel's arrival, looked at him too, with a mix of curiosity and expectation. Miguel approached with a firm step, although inside he felt as if each step weighed a ton. "Thanks for coming," Miguel said, breaking the silence as he took a seat in front of them. "We couldn't leave this conversation pending," Ana responded, in a tone that combined seriousness and warmth. Miguel looked at Lucas, noticing the inquisitive expression on his face. It was strange to sit across from someone he barely knew, but felt so close to. "Lucas, I want to be honest with you," Miguel began, his voice slightly trembling. "For many years, I didn't know you existed. If I had known, I would have done everything possible to be present." Lucas blinked, surprised by the frankness of Miguel's words. Ana eyed him warily, as if trying to gauge his reaction. "So, you're my dad?" Lucas asked, his voice heavy with emotion. Miguel nodded slowly, feeling the weight of that word resonate within him. "Yes, I am." Lucas leaned back in his chair, processing what he had just heard. His eyes traveled between Miguel and Ana, as if seeking confirmation that this was not a misunderstanding. "This is a lot," the young man admitted with a nervous smile. "But I guess it makes sense. I always felt like something was missing, though I never knew what it was." Ana put a hand on her son's arm, giving him support. "We understand that it won't be easy for any of us, Lucas. But if you're willing, I think we can try." Miguel breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing those words. He looked Lucas straight in the eyes and said, "I want to get to know you, to know who you are, and for you to know who I am too. I don't want you to feel like you have to decide anything right now, but I want you to know that I'm here." Lucas looked at him for a few seconds before nodding. "We could start by talking, getting to know each other." A genuine smile formed on Miguel's face. "Sounds like a good plan to me." The rest of the conversation was more lighthearted, with Lucas telling stories about his life and interests. Miguel, for the first time in years, stopped thinking about what he had lost and began to focus on what he could build. Ana watched them both with a mix of relief and hope, grateful that the conversation was flowing naturally. When they finally left the cafe, Lucas said goodbye with an awkward but sincere hug, leaving Miguel and Ana alone for a few moments. "Thank you for giving her this opportunity," said Miguel, looking at Ana seriously. "Thank you for daring to face all this," Ana replied softly. "It may be too late for us, but it is never too late for him." Miguel nodded, feeling that those words held an undeniable truth. As he watched them walk away, he knew that his life was taking a new direction. He was no longer just a pilot navigating endless skies. He was now learning to anchor his roots to solid ground. The road ahead would be difficult, but it was also full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, Miguel felt that fate had given him a second chance, one he did not intend to waste. Sometimes life gives us a second chance to face our past and build a new beginning. Miguel had to choose between continuing to run or facing his mistakes, and in doing so, he discovered that the greatest value is not in the skies we soar, but in the connections we cultivate on Earth. What would you have done in his place? Would you have taken the risk of opening old wounds to heal, or would you have continued with your life as if nothing had happened? Click on the video above to continue this incredible journey of self-discovery and explore how our choices can redefine our future. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heart-touching and thought-provoking stories. See you in the next video.